Welcome to Byte-Sized Tech, where we blend casual conversations with insightful discussions on the latest in technology and gadgets.
Always fun to be here.
Today, we are diving into some cybersecurity stories that really highlight how threats are evolving in some pretty unexpected ways.
Yeah.
I mean, you try to be safe online, but then suddenly snail mail becomes a vector for malware.
Right.
It's wild.
It is pretty wild.
So,
Hackers are definitely getting more creative,
Oh.
finding new ways to exploit our trust
yeah,
in things we wouldn't normally associate with cyber threats.
like snail mail.
Like snail mail, exactly.
Yeah, so let's start with this whole snail mail malware thing.
Okay.
I read about it in Switzerland,
Yeah.
but I have to admit, I was pretty skeptical at first.
I can understand that.
You know,
It sounds like something out of a spy movie, right?
so like,
But it's actually happening.
really?
Hackers are sending out these official-looking letters
Oh, wow.
mimicking the Swiss Federal Office of Meteorology and Climatology. They even include logos and everything to make them seem legit.
Oh, so you would think it's real.
Exactly.
So how does it actually work?
Well,
I mean, do they expect people to download a virus from a piece of paper?
not quite.
Okay.
Inside these letters, there's a QR code.
Oh, a QR code?
You know those square barcodes you scan with your phone?
Yeah.
People are used to scanning QR codes for everything these days.
Right.
So it doesn't seem that out of place.
Okay, so you scan the code, and then what?
Well,
Does it automatically install malware on your phone?
it's a bit more subtle than that.
Okay.
The QR code takes you to a website that's designed to look like it's hosting a weather warning app.
A weather warning app.
Yes, but instead of an app, you end up downloading something called Copper or Octo malware.
A copper or octo.
Yeah,
Those are some interesting names for malware.
right.
What exactly do they do?
Well, this is where it gets really concerning.
Okay.
These pieces of malware are designed to steal your two-factor authentication codes.
Two-factor authentication codes.
Yeah, which are the security codes you get via text message or app to verify your identity.
Right.
It can also log your keystrokes, basically recording everything you type,
Oh, wow.
and even create fake phishing pages that look like your banking apps.
Wait, hold on.
Yeah,
So this malware can potentially bypass two-factor authentication?
potentially, yes.
Isn't that supposed to be one of the most secure ways to protect your accounts?
It is, and that's what makes this attack so effective.
Oh,
Two-factor authentication relies on the assumption that your phone is secure.
right.
But if your phone itself is infected with malware, that extra layer of security can be compromised.
So what you're saying is that even with two-factor authentication,
Yes,
we're not completely safe.
you are correct.
I mean, I always thought that was like the gold standard for security.
It's still an important security measure,
Okay.
but this attack highlights the need for multiple layers of defense. And it underscores how creative hackers are getting in finding ways to exploit our trust. I mean, who would have thought snail mail would be a cybersecurity threat in 2024?
Right.
Like, who would have thought?
It's like we're going back to the Stone Age of hacking, but with modern-day technology.
Exactly.
It's a strange combination of old-school tactics and cutting-edge malware.
And that's what makes it so dangerous.
Yeah.
People might let their guard down because it seems so outlandish.
Okay, so snail mail is officially on my list of things to be paranoid about.
Right.
I guess it's back to the good old days of just throwing away anything that looks even remotely suspicious.
That's not a bad idea.
All right.
But let's move on to another threat.
Okay.
That's a bit more tech-focused, but just as surprising in its approach.
Right.
Have you heard about the nearest neighbor attack?
Nearest neighbor attack.
Yes.
It sounds kind of ominous.
It does.
Is this like a digital version of Keeping Up with the Joneses, where you're only as secure as your weakest neighbor?
You're closer than you think with that analogy.
Oh, really?
This attack exploits the fact that we're all interconnected through Wi-Fi networks, even if those networks are password protected.
So even if I have a strong Wi-Fi password,
Right.
and I'm using multi-factor authentication for my accounts,
Yes.
I could still be vulnerable because of someone else's weak security.
That's the scary part.
Oh, boy.
This attack targets something called dual-homed devices.
Dual home devices.
Yes.
Okay, that sounds a bit technical.
It is a bit technical.
Can you break that down for me a bit?
Sure. Imagine a laptop
Okay.
that's connected to both a secure Wi-Fi network like your home or office network,
Yeah.
and also connected to a less secure network like a public Wi-Fi hotspot.
Okay.
That laptop is now a bridge between those two networks.
That's like a link.
Exactly.
Okay, I'm starting to see where this is going.
Good.
So an attacker could potentially compromise a device on a less secure network.
Right.
And then use that device to access a more secure network that it's also connected to.
Exactly. It's like using a backdoor to sneak into a building. They're essentially hopping from one network to another through these dual-homed devices.
So in a way, it is like my earlier analogy.
It is.
About being only as secure as your weakest neighbor.
Yes.
If someone on the same public Wi-Fi network as me has poor security,
right,
I could potentially be at risk.
That's one scenario.
Oh, God.
But it can also happen in corporate environments. Think of a situation where someone brings their work laptop home and connects it to their home Wi-Fi, which might not have the same level of security as the corporate network.
Oh, so even if a company has strong security measures in place,
exactly,
an employee's personal devices could create a vulnerability.
Potentially, yes.
That's a pretty sobering thought.
It is.
You know?
And this nearest neighbor attack highlights how interconnectedness, while beneficial in many ways, can also create new attack vectors for hackers to exploit.
It's like a constant game of whack-a-mole with cybersecurity, isn't it?
It can feel that way sometimes.
You plug one hole, and another one pops up somewhere else.
Exactly. But the key takeaway here is that we need to be aware of these evolving threats and take steps to protect ourselves both individually and as organizations.
Okay, so we've got snail mail, malware, and Wi-Fi network infiltration to worry about.
It's a lot.
Is there anything else lurking in the shadows that we should be aware of?
Well, let's shift gears a bit and talk about something that's been making headlines lately. Google and its potential monopoly.
Ah, yes. The tech giant in the hot seat. I've seen some articles about the Department of Justice. DOJ looking into them. What's the latest on that?
The DOJ has proposed some pretty significant measures to address concerns about Google's market dominance. They're worried that Google's control over search, advertising, Android, and Chrome is stifling competition and potentially putting users at risk.
So it's not just about Google being a big company, but about the potential consequences of that power.
Exactly. The DOJ argues that this lack of competition could stifle innovation and lead to higher prices for consumers. They're also concerned about the potential for Google to use its dominance in one area, like search, to unfairly advantage its other products, like its browser or mobile operating system.
Right, so they could give themselves an advantage over everyone else.
Exactly.
And what about the risks to users? I know Google collects a lot of data on its users.
They do.
Is the DOJ addressing that as part of their concerns?
Yes, they are. They argue that if Google controls too much of the market, it could potentially control what information people see and how they access it. This could have implications for everything from privacy to free speech.
So what is the DOJ actually proposing to do about all of this?
Well,
are they talking about breaking up Google?
They've suggested some pretty drastic measures.
Like what?
Including the possibility of Google having to divest or sell off some of its businesses.
Wow, divestment. That would be a huge shakeup in the tech world.
Absolutely.
Wow.
And they're specifically looking at the potential for Google to have to sell off Android, its mobile operating system.
Oh, wow.
And Chrome, its web browser.
I mean, those are two of the most widely used platforms in the world.
Exactly.
If Google were forced to divest them, it would be a major shift in the tech landscape.
It would be.
So it's not just about selling off these platforms.
Yes, it's not.
The DOJ is also proposing restrictions on future acquisitions by Google.
Yes.
Especially in areas like AI and ad tech.
That's right.
So they're trying to limit Google's ability to expand its reach even further.
They are.
Especially in areas that are increasingly important in the digital economy.
Exactly.
And they're also looking at giving publishers more control over their data.
Yes.
One proposal would give publishers the right to opt out of having their data used to train Google's AI models.
Right.
That's an interesting angle.
It is.
So they're acknowledging the concerns around data privacy and giving some power back to the content creators.
That's right. It's all about trying to find a balance between fostering innovation and protecting consumers and competition.
It sounds like this could be a really long legal battle.
It likely will be.
Google is not going to give up its dominance without a fight.
Google has a lot of resources and is sure to fight back against any attempt to break up its empire.
Well, this is all definitely food for thought.
It is.
It's fascinating to see how cybersecurity is evolving, not just in terms of the technical attacks,
right,
but also in terms of the legal and regulatory landscape.
And it highlights the importance of being aware of these issues, both as individuals and as a society.
I couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
We need to stay informed and engaged
Do.
to ensure that technology serves us in a positive way.
Absolutely. It's a conversation that we need to keep having.
Well, this has been a truly insightful deep dive into the world of cybersecurity and tech.
It has been.
It really has.
It's been a pleasure exploring these topics with you.
Absolutely. And thank you to our listeners for joining us on this journey.
Yes, thank you for listening.
We'll be back soon with more bite-sized tech discussions.
It really does feel like a whole new era for the internet.
You know, it's interesting that you mentioned that because this whole situation with Google kind of reminds me of what happened with Microsoft back in the 90s.
That's a great comparison. The Microsoft case was a landmark antitrust lawsuit that really shaped how we think about competition in the tech industry.
Exactly. Back then, Microsoft was accused of using its dominance in the operating system market to stifle competition in other areas like web browsers.
And there are definitely some parallels to the Google case today. The DOJ is arguing that Google is using its control over search and Android to give its own products an unfair advantage.
I guess the big question is, will history repeat itself? Will Google be forced to break up its empire like Microsoft was?
It's tough to say. The tech landscape has changed a lot since the 90s. The internet is much more complex, and the lines between different types of technology are blurred.
That's true. Back then, it was all about desktop computers and software. Now we have smartphones, cloud computing, artificial intelligence, and who knows what else is coming next.
The DOJ will have to make a strong case that Google's actions are actually harming consumers and stifling innovation. And Google, of course, will fight back with its own army of lawyers and lobbyists.
It's going to be a fascinating legal battle to watch. But regardless of the outcome, I think this whole situation raises some important questions about the power of big tech companies.
Absolutely. We need to have a serious conversation about how to balance the need for innovation with the need for competition and consumer protection.
I mean, on the one hand, we want companies like Google to push the boundaries of technology and create amazing products. But on the other hand, we don't want them to become so powerful that they can dictate the terms of the entire digital economy.
It's a delicate balance, and finding the right approach will require careful consideration from lawmakers, regulators, and the tech industry itself.
Well, I'm sure we'll be talking about this a lot more in the future. But for now, let's circle back to those cybersecurity threats we were discussing earlier.
Good idea. After all, knowledge is our best defense against these evolving threats.
And speaking of knowledge, I have to admit, I'm still a bit confused about how these dual home devices work in the nearest neighbor attack.
Can you explain it again, but maybe use a simpler analogy this time?
Of course. Think of it like a house with two doors, a front door and a back door. The front door is like your secure Wi-Fi network with a strong lock and maybe even an alarm system.
Okay, that makes sense.
Now, the back door is like a public Wi-Fi network, which might not be as secure. If someone manages to pick the lock on the back door, they can get into the house even though the front door is still locked.
Ah, I see. So a dual home device is like a house with two doors, and the attacker is using the less secure door to gain access to the whole house.
Exactly. And in this case, the house is your network, and the attacker is using the less secure network connection to gain access to your devices or data. That's a much clearer explanation. Thanks for breaking it down for me.
No problem at all. It's important to understand these concepts so we can take appropriate steps to protect ourselves.
So what can we do to protect ourselves from this type of attack? Should we avoid using public Wi-Fi altogether?
That's one option, but it's not always practical. We all rely on public Wi-Fi sometimes, whether it's at a coffee shop, an airport, or even a hotel.
Right. So what are some more realistic steps we can take?
Well, first and foremost, make sure your devices are up to date with the latest security patches. These updates often include fixes for vulnerabilities that hackers could exploit.
It's easy to ignore those update notifications, but they really are important.
Absolutely. And be cautious about what information you share or access when using public Wi-Fi. Avoid logging into sensitive accounts like your bank or email if possible.
So basically, treat public Wi-Fi like a public restroom, get in, do what you need to do, and get out as quickly as possible.
That's a good way to think about it. And if you absolutely need to access sensitive information, consider using a virtual private network or VPN.
A VPN encrypts your internet traffic and makes it much harder for hackers to snoop on your activity.
Exactly. It's like putting your data in a secret envelope that only you and the intended recipient can open.
Okay, so update your devices, be cautious about what you do on public Wi-Fi, and consider using a VPN. Any other tips for staying safe online?
Well, this might seem obvious, but strong passwords are crucial.
I know. Password 123 is not a good password.
It's tempting to use simple passwords that are easy to remember, but they're also easy for hackers to guess. Use a combination of upper and lowercase letters, numbers, and symbols.
And what about those password manager apps? Are those a good idea?
Password managers are a great way to keep track of all your passwords securely. They generate and store complex passwords for you so you don't have to remember them all.
I've been meaning to try one of those. It's just hard to break the habit of using the same password for everything.
I understand, but trust me, it's worth the effort. A password manager can really make a big difference in your online security.
And speaking of security, what about multi-factor authentication? We talked about how that copper malware can potentially bypass two-factor authentication. Does that mean it's not effective anymore?
Multi-factor authentication is still an important security measure, but it's not foolproof, as we've seen with the Snail mail malware. It's like any security system, it can be bypassed if the attacker is determined enough.
So what's the solution? Do we need to come up with even stronger forms of authentication?
The key is to have multiple layers of security. Don't rely on just one method like a password or two-factor authentication. Combine them with other measures like strong passwords, up-to-date software, and a healthy dose of skepticism.
So it's all about being proactive and taking a holistic approach to cybersecurity.
Exactly. It's like building a fortress around your digital life. The more layers of defense you have, the harder it will be for attackers to break through.
It's amazing how we've gone from snail mail malware to the potential dismantling of a tech giant all in one episode.
Yeah, it really is a lot to think about.
Cybersecurity and the future of the internet, definitely a lot to unpack.
Yeah, for sure.
You know, when we were talking about Google and potential divestment, I kept thinking back to the whole copper malware situation. What if down the line, a more fragmented Android market actually makes us more vulnerable to these kinds of attacks?
That's a really good point.
You think so?
Yeah, a less unified Android ecosystem
Yeah.
could mean more difficulty in pushing out security updates consistently.
Oh, so some people might not get the updates.
Exactly. Some users might be left behind,
Oh,
creating more potential targets for malware.
so it's not a simple equation of break up big tech equals more good.
Right.
There are potential downsides to consider as well.
Exactly. Competition is generally good for innovation, but too much fragmentation can lead to a chaotic landscape where security suffers. It's a delicate balance that the DOJ will have to consider carefully.
And it's not just about Android, right?
No.
The DOJ is also talking about Chrome.
Right.
What happens if Google is forced to sell off its browser business?
That's a big question.
Yeah.
Chrome is the dominant browser right now, and a lot of web standards are essentially dictated by what Chrome can do. A new landscape could lead to more competition between browsers,
Okay.
but it also might lead to compatibility issues for websites and users.
Oh, right, yeah.
Like, imagine having to check if a website works on 5 different browsers instead of just one.
Ugh, yeah, that would be annoying.
That could get old fast.
Yeah, for sure.
And we haven't even touched on the potential impact on things like data privacy
Oh, right.
and user tracking if these different entities are all vying for control of your browsing data.
It's like, on the one hand, it's good to break up monopolies and foster competition.
Right.
But on the other hand, there are these unforeseen consequences
Exactly.
that could end up hurting the user experience or even making us less safe in some way.
Exactly, and that's why these decisions can't be made lightly.
Yeah.
There needs to be a deep understanding of the potential ripple effects across the entire tech ecosystem.
Well, I, for one, am going to be following this case very closely.
I think we all are.
It feels like a real turning point in how we view and regulate the internet.
Agreed. It's a landmark case that could set precedents for years to come.
Yeah.
And who knows, maybe we'll see even more unexpected twists and turns as things progress.
Like maybe hackers will start targeting snail mail delivery services to disrupt the entire physical mail system.
Well, let's hope not.
Okay, maybe that's a bit too far-fetched.
I think so.
But in all seriousness, I think the main takeaway for our listeners today is that the digital world is constantly changing.
It is.
What seems secure today might be vulnerable tomorrow.
Right.
And what seems like a simple annoyance, like snail mail, could be hiding a sophisticated threat.
Absolutely.
So true. And it's our responsibility to stay informed, be aware of the risks, and take proactive steps to protect ourselves.
Yeah.
It's not just about relying on tech companies or the government to keep us safe. We have a role to play as well.
Absolutely. Cybersecurity is a shared responsibility. We all need to be vigilant, skeptical, and willing to adapt as the landscape evolves.
Well said. Thanks for joining me today for this deep dive into the wild world of cybersecurity and the future of tech.
Yeah, it's been fun.
It's always a fascinating and slightly terrifying journey.
Yeah, a little bit of both.
My pleasure.
Really?
It's important to have these conversations and keep shining a light on the challenges and opportunities that technology presents. And as always, thanks to all our listeners for tuning in to Byte-Sized Tech.
Thanks for listening, everyone.
If you enjoyed this episode, like, comment, share, and subscribe for more fun tech discussions.
And until next time, stay curious and stay safe out there in the digital world.